Hi friends, Carrie here, and I have a message today for you of hope and transformation. If you are finding this reading, there's a very high chance that you are somebody who has been doing a lot of intensive internal work and you're starting to notice things come back up to the surface that you haven't experienced in quite some time, and you're wondering about how to navigate these new energies or these old energies that are being renewed. Guiding our reading today, we have Laced Moon's Daughter. She is absolutely about guiding us through the dark, unknown spaces in order to discover and rediscover parts of ourselves to come to a higher level of consciousness. You know, the inspiration that comes in the night sky when you look up at the moon and the stars and you feel that connectedness, right? She helps us navigate when we're walking through darker spaces, much in the kind of moon energy where things might seem out of proportion, something larger than it is, something smaller, something that you can't see, something which is more bold. She is very much about helping us to be conscious and navigating these spaces so that way we can be able to discover aspects and rediscover aspects of ourselves and all our possibilities and, you know, every potential that we have within ourselves in order to, continue to grow and expand as individuals. Starting out, we have the the Knave of Pentacles. I'm getting that if you are, finding this reading, you've been doing a lot of inner child work, and this is very appropriate, right? Because our inner child is where we have our sense of magic, inspiration, creativity, joy, play, all the potential that we have to create from, our lives and the direction we want to go comes from this inner child. Now, as you've been doing this work, this very intensive focus on healing your inner child, you're probably starting to wonder, what are the possibilities, right? Because you've discovered a certain amount of possibilities within yourself, like, oh, I have this ability, I have this gift, and these are things that I want to grow. And then you're also wondering, well, if I can do this, what else can I do? Or if I understand this, what else is deeper within me to be seen? And what you've come to discover is actually this, Five of Wands. When we look at the Five of Wands in this deck, the story is that you have these two elf boys who, they started out on an adventure, they started out on a journey, and they don't know what's ahead of them. They just know that they want to go exploring. They want to have stories to bring back. They want to have something special to themselves. And they meet this older elf girl, and she hands them this egg. And they're kind of now considering what's in the egg. Could it be a phoenix? Could it be a dragon? What are the possibilities, right? There was the difference between like the reminiscing kind of, possibilities, adventure, play, danger, whatever the case being, versus like you knew you had this potential as a child, right? The contemplative, stay where we're at, think about the possibilities, the go out and find the adventure type of an energy. Now, this, if you look at the colors, very prominent in this card, in this suit, you have all this orange and red, right? It goes into that sacral chakra, energy, that primordial connection, not just the very basis, like I'm surviving, but how do I connect with others? How do I relate to the world? Is this person safe? Is this way of being in the world okay? Can I express myself this way, that way? We have these kind of that discovery about our role in the world and how we interact with that. And you've come to realize there's a lot in here. There's so much. There's all these possibilities. The Empress here, she's got all these different variety of flowers around her, the diversity of life. She's got this wheat, which she gazes at, both life and death, right? We harvest the wheat to, make our bread, but we sow some of the grain back to grow new wheat. And you realize, this complexity, this, energy, the reality of this inner world is so vast and so complex that you probably need help. You probably need help from a guide who is more familiar with the terrain. We have this nymph here. She is riding on this dragonfly, a symbol that we often see with somebody doing shamanic journeying, to connect to their ancestors, to connect to the other worlds. Dragonfly is a very powerful and potent guide in that. So you might be doing, shamanic work, dream work, astral travel, if those particular things are relevant to your path. Even if you're not doing those more direct, overt kinds of forms of inner exploration, because you are doing this inner exploration, this variety, this complexity, this diversity in life, you end up discovering this devil energy, okay? And when we're thinking of the devil energy, we're not really looking at him in terms of like a negative entity, right? He is so very close to the very beginning, the primordial energy, of, the primordial soup of life, that there's barely any difference between it and him. So you've come to realize that these desires that you have in yourself, these impulses, these, whatever it was that you had as a child that maybe you had, either suppressed or distorted in some sort of an unhealthy way, you're rediscovering these energies and they're coming back up. It might seem a little bit scary, being this, devil card. So we end up kind of pulling ourselves into this Four of Cups, this separation, yourself, your more primordial self, you have in the Rider-Waite-Smith, the individual meditating, he's got 3 cups in front of him, but then there's the 1 cup being offered to him that he doesn't see. This turning away. You have turned away from some essential aspect of yourself, some essential part of yourself, right? Maybe you didn't have healthy relationships growing up. Maybe whatever, because you couldn't get the nurturing that you wanted, you looked for it in other areas, or you looked for that pleasure and joy in the way you relate to your experience in other areas. Maybe you could have been somebody who has an addiction. Maybe you could be somebody who, sexually was very, open and promiscuous, and, your energies just gave out freely, or you just were so indulgent, right? You came to this realization in your life at some point or another that whatever the thing that you were connected to, or whatever the pattern or behavior, was not serving your good. In fact, was very much a destructive force in your life. So it was only natural that you turn away from the thing that you realized was destroying your life. Now, when you came to this realization, you didn't yet have the capacity or the skills in order to know how to handle the thing. So that turning away was a suppression, right? That's where, the drugs could have come in, or, whatever the case. But you get to this point where you got clean, or you stopped the behavior, the destructive patterns. You came into a more healthy relationship. And you want to go from this 4 of Cups into this 10 of Cups, right? This reunion. The story being that, this elf boy and this nymph girl, they were early childhood lovers. They had the puppy love. They were really super excited about each other. And this water nymph, she goes and she tells her friends, about this elf that she met and how interesting and fantastic he is. And they kind of tease her and poke at her, and she ends up breaking it off with him, right? Thinking, if I'm going to be experiencing this kind of negativity, then maybe this isn't a good thing. Well, she grows older. And realizes that this connection is genuine, that it's beautiful. And she goes and she seeks him out. She goes and, seeks into a land she doesn't know. She's in this, this swamp, and she's going off to the forest. You are going inward. You are exploring an unknown territory, or at least a territory that you haven't visited within yourself so long, because you want to reconnect. You want to reconnect with that inner child. You want to reconnect with that secure, happy, free sense of self and your ability to relate to the world and to imagine better things for yourself. And the thing is, since you've done all this growth, since you've done all this work, to be able to understand yourself better, to be able to handle the life's ups and downs better, you've come to this Eight of Swords type of energy, you know. In the Rider-Waite-Smith, you see this woman, she's bound up, all tied, she's got the blindfold, the swords are surrounding her, and she feels she's trapped. You know, though, you know, that you're not trapped. You know, the queen here in this, you know, this card, she's not blindfolded. You realize that this energy that you have, that this driving force that you had, was able to create this destruction and binding and difficulties and things in your life, and you realize, well, if this energy is here and I can create these difficulties for myself, then I can take that same energy and I can create positive, happy, joyful, healthy, beautiful things for myself, right? And that's where, you know, we have this power to free or to bind, right? You now have the ability to consciously direct your energy, which kind of brings to the point of the priest in this deck. He is the Hierophant of the, you know, the Mystic Fairy Tarot. If you know the symbolism in the typical Hierophant, you would see this key, the power to loose or the bind. You have this embodiment now, right? You understand enough about your higher self and your lower self that you are able to live life from a point to where you're not acting unconsciously, to where you are making choices about how you're going to interact with the world, how you're going to interact with others, so that way you can build something valuable for yourself and sustain something valuable for yourself. Okay, so this energy is coming back up, and you realize, well, I can't suppress it because it's just going to come out in another direction, right? And I can't repeat the same behaviors and patterns I had because I know the result. You know, I know if I do a certain thing, it's going to drain me. I know if I do another thing that it's going to energize me and, you know, restore me and regenerate me. And that, you know, we come into this energy of justice, right? Justice is blind. It's not necessarily a moral, like, this is bad, this is good, in, you know, that sense that we try to put, you know, labels on things. But you just understand that, you know, like, if something takes from your energy, it leaves you with less. If something gives to your energy, it leaves you with more. And the old behaviors, the old cycles, the addictions, the impulsiveness, whatever it is, you can't go down that path anymore because it's not serving you, it's not healthy, it's not helping you, it diminishes you, and it really, you know, prevents you from getting to where you want to go, right? You have this Nine of Wands, right? And you're sitting there and you're contemplating, how do I deal with this? You're alert, you're on ready, you know, you see the thing come up. Say if you were somebody who, you know, you have an addiction, you see this craving come back up, but you have this awareness, this separation, to where you're able to look at it and guard yourself from it, right? But then you wonder, what do I do with this? What, you know, how do I work with this energy? Okay, and you come from this emperor, you know, this self-sovereignty, the ability to, you know, control yourself, the mastery of yourself. You have gained a certain mastery of yourself, so you figure, well, if I'm gaining this mastery, if I have this mastery and this thing comes up, well, how do I use the skills that I have in order to, you know, make this energy do something that is productive for me, something that is beneficial for me? And we get this energy of the star. Okay, when I'm looking at the star, I'm thinking about the fluidity of the water, the you know, how whatever you pour, you know, the water into, whether you pour it into the water or onto the rocks, the water is going to flow regardless, right? And so it's this flow, this energy movement. You might be somebody who could practice Tai Chi, yoga, you know, Reiki, some way that you have a conscious ability to connect with and direct your energy. There are practices in a lot of, you know, Eastern kind of like spiritual, you know, worldviews where you take this energy, your sacral, right? That sexual energy, the creative energy, the artistic energy, whatever the case being, you know, and you pull it up to the heart, right? And you bring that up higher and you circulate circulate the energy, get the energy flowing, right? It's going to want to go somewhere, whether that craving wants to go somewhere, whether, that impulse wants to go somewhere, it's going to come up. So you have to find this ability to circulate it. And you don't have to necessarily know, what am I going to do with this? Just circulate the energy, okay? Going back to that kind of analogy of like the high, maybe you had somebody who was addicted, and like every time you would, you partake in that substance, you get this altered state and you feel good for a little while. And you've come to realize how destructive that force was in your life. So, you get off of it, you have that willpower, that ability to guard, that self-mastery, the ability to guard. And, you develop a healthy kind of like a habit. Instead, like, okay, I know that I have a craving, but I'm going to ignore that craving. Instead, I'm going to go for a jog. And you jog for a little while and you get pretty good at it. And then one day you're out on a jog and it hits you, the runner's high. And it's like, oh man, I'm in this altered state again. And, you kind of maybe have that little bit of a fear reaction, right? Because you realize, if there's this other thing that I can do that brings me into an altered state, that brings me this euphoria, it could be destructive, right? You could be pulled back down into that. But here's the difference. If you're using a substance or a behavior or a person to make you feel a certain way versus realizing that you can come to a certain feeling within yourself, one's destructive and one is creative. That jogging is a form of circulation. Maybe you are somebody who likes to exercise. You feel these things come up, you feel all these old emotions, so you move, right? You dance, you go for a run, maybe you do some push-ups. The point of the matter, you get this energy moving, right? You have this conscious control of it. And when you move this energy, you regulate it. You come to this King of Cups, right? The King of Cups, he's very much in touch with these emotions. He's regulated, the ups and downs of life, the waves beating on, the shore against his throne. Even though you don't see that in this, it's this ability to be not overwhelmed, right? You get to this point to where, because you are taking this energy and you're moving it and you're circulating it and you put it in towards something that's good for you, it gives you the ability to not be overwhelmed by it. All right, so, we're talking about just this general sense of moving the energy, but what happens when you have the craving? What happens when you have the impulse? What happens when you find yourself in the moment sinking back into an old behavior? And it's just that circulation, that Ace of Cups. When I think of the Ace of Cups, it gives me this, vision of like any heart opening, this heart energy, dripping this love, just this nectar, this sweetness of experience coming from your heart. That cup, that chalice could also be that sacral energy. So yet again, circulate it. Circulate the energy. It's because you've realized that, this energy is not really necessarily an ending thing, because it is a flowing type of thing. You think of like the cycles of water. You have the rain on the mountains that works its way down into the streams, into the rivers and the ocean, and evaporates and heads back over the mountains. Okay, this energy, this craving, this whatever it is an association you have with this natural, creative, vital energy. It flows, right? So when it comes up, you can channel that. You can direct that flow. And when you direct that flow, you can take that in order to create for yourself. You have the Nine of Pentacles, the self-made woman, the self-made man. Even though she's got her little mouse companions here, they work together, they taught each other skills. You become this self-made type of an individual. You realize that, like, not only is this energy here and I can regulate myself and I cannot be overwhelmed by it and drawn back in, I can direct it consciously. And this is where the magic happens, right? You go from this priest energy to this high priestess energy, right? This external, kind of shamanic spiritual work to this more internal shamanic spiritual work, you are able to turn inward, right? Because okay, I want something for myself. I have this energy here that will help me reach this, this end goal. You turn inward, you focus, and you calm. And now that you've kind of eased yourself, the energy isn't stopped. It's just brought to an ease. And you come into this, Knight of Pentacles, the one step at a time, the slow and steady, wins the race. You can take this energy now and just each day, each step, be like, here I am today. I'm going to choose today to put my energy towards something healthy. I'm going to choose today to take that next step to create what I want for myself. And you come to this Three of Pentacles. That scary energy, which you had suppressed for so long, is now your ally, is now the patron helping you to build, something beautiful for yourself, to build that temple that you would see in the Rider-Waite Smith. The artisan with the priest and, the rich sponsor. That wealth, that abundance, that provides for all because you are part of that life is now your ally. Take it and use that to grow and create something beautiful. All right, friends, thank you so much for following this reading with me. If anything I've said offers value to you, I would absolutely love it if you would give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment in the comment section. Don't know what to comment? Go ahead and leave something like, for the algorithm, or leave me a sunflower emoji. That is a spiritual guide of mine. It'll let me know you see me, and it'll let the algorithm know that my content is worth seeing. If you're not subscribed already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Head in, find a video that resonates with you. And by the way, if you don't find a video that resonates with you, go into the community section. I've got a tagged post. Ask me a question for a reading, and I will make a video on it for you. I'll see you in the next one.